McConnellReport.com. This is the election you get for $9 billion is the headline. And I started out by pointing out that, yeah, the polls are tightening up right now. And, the media is treating this like it's some sort of mystical force of nature, causing people to shift their concerns away from abortion and guns and climate and democracy and the survival of Social Security. And suddenly they're all concerned about gas prices, black crime, banning books, and trans kids playing sports. Really? The media, of course, knows what's going on. I mean, they're the ones who are benefiting from this. I used to work in the advertising business, and I lay this out in the article. Back in the 70s, I was a partner in a small ad agency in Lansing, Michigan. My partner was Terry O'Connor. The company was called Tear Graphics. He started it. And I was a copywriter for another ad agency in downtown Lansing. It was called Barden Durst. It was run by the late Bob Strand. Both these guys have passed away now. I was a kid. I was in my in my early 20s, and these guys were my mentors, and along with Joe Sugarman, the legendary ad guy who I sat at the feet of, and I am still grateful to. Later in the 1970s, I taught advertising and marketing around the world for the American Marketing Centers. And in 1989, Louise and I started an advertising agency in Atlanta that we sold in 1997. And with the proceeds from that, moved to Vermont and lived in the mountains for a few years. And I started writing books and eventually started this show as a hobby for my retirement. Yeah. But, when we owned that company, that ad agency in Atlanta in the 90s, we had more than 100 of the Fortune 500 companies among our clients. And, we did work for corporations. We did work for the U.S. Army. We did work for the NSA and the CIA. I mean, right across the board. We took in a lot of clients. And I've been hosting this talk show, which is the #1 progressive show in America and has been for well over a decade. I've been hosting this show for more than 19 years. Well, it'll be 20 years next March. And I worked in radio news for 7 years before that. Now, I give you that CV, that long thing, not to brag at you about any particular accomplishment. I mean, anybody can point to, with a long life like mine, can point to things that they've done. But to hopefully try to convince you that when I talk about the impact of advertising, I know what I'm talking about. And I can tell you that, from years of experience, that the single most important thing in advertising is how much money you spend. You can have a really crappy ad, but if you repeat it over and over and over again, people will respond to it. You can have a really mediocre product, but if you advertise it like crazy and the competing products can't match your advertising, you're going to end up dominating the market, even with a crummy product. And we all know of examples of this. So why should it surprise us that as right-wing billionaires are literally pouring billions of dollars? The best estimate, NPR did a story on this a couple days ago, the best estimate is this is going to be that just in the federal election, just in the 435 House races and the 30 or so Senate races, we're going to spend more than $9 billion. And when I say we, I say that very advisedly. On the Democratic side, most of the Democrats are being funded, by and large, by small donations from people like you and me. On the Republican side, almost the vast majority of the funding is coming instead from right-wing billionaires and giant corporations. And, remember the old cliche back in the Reagan 80s, he who dies with the most toys wins? There was a bumper sticker that was a big deal in the 80s. Celebrating the whole greed is good ethos that the Republicans brought us in the 80s. Well, there's a grain of truth to that if you tweak it slightly and say he who ends the campaign with the most dollars or the most advertising having been spent wins the election. And in fact, there have been all kinds of studies done over the years, I mean, literally dozens of them, really good scientific studies, showing that the candidate who spends the most in an election wins between 80 and 95% of the time. The average of all these studies is 91% of the time. The candidate who spends the most money wins. NPR found that $1.6 billion has been spent, quote, with $3 out of every 4 being spent in 6 states, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Ohio. Most of that money, NPR reports, is coming from dark money outside groups with little to no donor transparency, and Republicans are getting a huge boost from them. 86% of the money is going toward pro-GOP TV ads coming from these outside groups compared to 55% for Democrats. Put simply, if it weren't, I'm quoting NPR here, put simply, if it weren't for these outside groups, Republican candidates would be swamped on the airwaves. 13 years ago, this would have been a federal felony. It was against the law for dark money groups to fund elections 13 years ago. And then in 2010 came Citizens United. And 5 right-wingers on the Supreme Court kicked the doors wide open. Now, why is this that, we're not hearing anything about this on the media? I mean, you hear these breathless reports from left-wing MSNBC, and I put that in scare quotes, to the middle CNN, to right-wing Fox News. You hear all these reports about, the polls are tightening up. The Republicans are catching up. It looks like it's easy, even Steven now. Do they ever say, because the Republicans have just spent $1 billion just on 6 or 7 Senate races? No. Why is it that they never say that? Well, remember Les Moonves back in 2016? And I quote, "Man, who would have expected the ride we're all having right now? It may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS. The money's rolling in, and this is fun. I've never seen anything like this. This is going to be a very good year for us. Sorry, it's a terrible thing to say, but bring it on, Donald. Keep it going." End quote. Big money in politics, on the one hand, and a democracy that works for the majority of Americans, on the other hand, are incompatible. Just ask any Russian or Hungarian. This is, if people power beats big money in this election, and that's what it will be if Democrats hold on to the House and the Senate. If people power beats big money in this election, then Democrats have to make job one passing election reform and getting money out of politics, overthrowing, undoing Citizens United. If they fail to do it, in 2024, the billionaires will just come in and go, it took $15 billion last time. Well, here's $20 billion this time. I mean, think about this for a minute. You're an American billionaire. And in 2016, you put $1 billion into the election, and you got a $2 trillion tax cut. You can't make that kind of investment on in stocks on Wall Street. You can't make that kind of investment by starting a business, put in $1 billion, make $1 trillion. Seriously? This is the biggest scam going in America. And we have to put an end to it. Meanwhile, a group of 30 House progressive Democrats have come out and said, America should be negotiating with Russia about Ukraine. Say what? We'll talk about that after the break.